This presentation is about how to use critical thinking when writing longer argumentative essays. Rule 34 says to just jump right in when you're starting an argumentative essay. This corresponds to the journalistic advice, don't bury the lead. The lead is basically how you start an essay, analogous to how you would start a journalistic piece, like a news article. So basically, things you want to avoid, you don't want to beat around the bush or give rhetorical padding to your beginning. So an example that might occur if you're writing an argumentative essay about the ethics of torture, if you said something like, since the beginning of time, people have debated the ethics of torture. For some reason, that sort of thing is a common way for starting argumentative essays. Even if it's true, it's kind of uninteresting or obvious, and so it's just preventing the reader from understanding either what the exact issue is or what the position of this paper is going to be. So a better strategy is to just launch straight into the argument. So for example, torture is never morally permissible, even when torturing a person might reveal information that would help save lives. That's just a statement of the thesis of the argumentative essay, but it's a better way of both getting the reader's attention and clarifying what this essay is going to be about. So there are two types of leads, hard lead and soft lead. The last example I gave about the ethics of torture was a hard lead. It communicates the main point of a story or essay in a single sentence. So the soft lead is different. It's where you set up the argumentative essay or news article, as the case may be, by setting the stage with a scene, story, or event. This is a kind of more dramatic, narrative way of grabbing the reader's attention. This can work with argumentative essays, even though it's more common to see it in journalism. However, the purpose of the soft lead should be just to illustrate what the specific issue is and or what the specific thesis is of the argumentative essay. Rule 35 says to use definite claims and proposals. So there are different types of things you could be arguing for, either a claim or a proposal. A claim is about what someone should believe, a proposal is about what they should do. The general rule is to be specific and concrete in the language that you use to clarify your conclusion. Here's an example of a vague proposal. Schools should evaluate teachers. That's saying something, it's not saying nothing, but it's not really being clear or concrete about how they should evaluate teachers. So here's an example of how to make that vague proposal more definite. Schools should give a standardized test to students before and after taking a course to assess how much they've learned after taking a teacher's course. Now that's better. It improves the precision of the proposal. It still doesn't clarify exactly what kind of test, what specific test should be used, but it does increase the clarity of that originally very vague proposal. We should distinguish between vagueness, ambiguity, and fuzziness. Vague means not precise or not clear. An example of a single word that's vague is thing, which could refer to, well, any number of things. An example of a sentence that's vague is something must be done. It's not clear what exactly is the thing that must be done. Ambiguity is different. It's when a word or a sentence has more than one meaning. Now, there could be a case of combined ambiguity and vagueness, but it's also possible for there to be ambiguity even though there's no vagueness. So there's two different possible meanings referred to. Each one might be clear or precise, but you don't know which one to use. So that's the nature of ambiguity, where there's more than one possible meaning in play. An example of a single word that's ambiguous is bachelor. Now, bachelor can mean either an unmarried male or someone who's going to college for their undergraduate degree, or who already received their undergraduate degree and is a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. An example of a sentence that's ambiguous is government officials should be elected by the people. The term or phrase that's ambiguous here is government officials. Government officials could refer to all of the employees of government, or it could refer just to certain of those employees. So that's something that should be clarified, made unambiguous in order to clarify the statement as a whole. And then finally, fuzziness is a concept or a sentence that has non-discrete boundaries or truth conditions. That's where how much the concept applies is a matter of degree, or how true the statement is a matter of degree, or could vary as a matter of degree. An example of a single term that's fuzzy is tall. Tall is not exactly vague because we know basically what we're talking about with the word tall. It's height. Tall is also not ambiguous, usually, if you're just referring to the literal height, say, of a person or of a building. However, if you say Matthew is tall, that is kind of fuzzy. We don't know exactly how tall is tall in this case because tallness varies as a matter of degree. Does tall mean he's at least 6 feet tall? Does it mean he's taller? We don't know. An example of a sentence that's fuzzy: wealthy people should be taxed more. There's at least two fuzzy aspects about this sentence. Wealth is a matter of degree, right? So which people count as wealthy? That's a fuzzy boundary, a fuzzy category. And also taxed more, that phrase is fuzzy because there's degrees of taxation and there's degrees of how much either their wealth or their income could be taxed. So fuzziness is different from ambiguity and vagueness. The rule is phrased in terms of vagueness, but in general you also want to avoid unnecessary ambiguity or fuzziness in your claim or proposal as well. So let's look at that distinction between claims and proposals in more detail. A claim is a position about what people should believe, whereas a proposal is a position about what they should do. And you could look at proposals as a proper subset of claims, because when you're arguing for a proposal, you're trying to get people to believe something about what they should do. Nevertheless, because the criteria for evaluating claims in general and proposals in particular vary, at least in terms of vagueness, for example, it's helpful to make a distinction between them. So the way you make a claim definite is by making it verifiable. Verifiable means you can test what that claim is saying against empirical evidence. Empirical means based on the senses, such as something that could be seen or heard. A way of thinking of verifiability is that the claim makes a prediction that can be compared with observable evidence. Here's an example of a vague claim: torture doesn't work. It's not clear exactly what doesn't work means. It's not directly testable against empirical evidence. So here's a way of making that vague claim more definite. A person who is tortured is more likely to lie to tell the torturer what he wants to hear than to provide new and accurate information. Now, this claim may be true or it may be false, but it is testable. That's what makes it definite. We could try to gather evidence based on people's actual behavior under torture to see if this more definite claim is in fact true. Whereas the vague claim, we don't know exactly what doesn't work means, so we can't directly test it against experience. Now, proposals, the way you make those definite, it varies from claims. So to make a proposal definite, you want to make it actionable, which means that the proposal is clear enough that it's clear how it can be put into action. So you could think of this as the proposal leading to, logically, certain observable actions. So here's an example of a vague proposal. The United States should not turn a blind eye to torture. The phrase turn a blind eye is unclear what exactly that means. Here's an example of how to make it more definite. The US government should adopt policies forbidding the use of torture by its agents and laws which punish those found guilty of torture with minimum sentences of 10 years in the federal prison. And obviously you could add additional detail to this proposal, but it's much less vague than what we started with. You have some more concrete guidance for how to put this into action in terms of policy. Now there's a couple of common mistakes that can be made when trying to make a claim or proposal more definite. So I wanted to go over those. Let's start with the proposal as an example. The US should get serious about high-speed rail. That contains a vague phrase, get serious. That could entail any number of possible actions or policies. Well, one way of attempting to make that vague proposal more definite is by saying something like, the state of California should get serious about high-speed rail. You might think it's made the vague proposal more precise because instead of talking about the US in general, we're talking about California in particular. But the original problem with that proposal was not the reference to the United States. That's actually pretty clear what that refers to. The original problem was the phrase "get serious about." And you'll notice the phrase "get serious about" is still present in our example. So we've narrowed the scope of what the proposal is about. It started being about the US, now it's about California, but we haven't gotten rid of the vagueness. So a way of making that proposal less vague could be something like the state of California should spend $10 billion on erecting high-speed rail, something like that. Or you could make that same claim about the United States in general. Now, another way of trying but failing to make a vague proposal definite would be to argue for the claim or the proposal. So here's an example. The government should get serious about high-speed rail because transportation is a human right. You'll notice the word "because" is a premise indicator. So we're starting out with the original proposal, the government should get serious about high-speed rail, and we've added a reason in support of it because transportation is a human right. Unfortunately, we still have the ambiguous or the vague phrase "get serious about." So the problem is we've added a reason but not gotten rid of that vagueness. So let's look at a sample problem about making a vague claim definite. The vague claim is America is a Christian nation. The part of it that's vague is the whole phrase "is a Christian nation." We don't know what exactly that is saying. Is it saying that a majority of Americans are Christian? Is it saying that Christianity is or should be supported by the government? We don't know. Here's an example of making it more definite. 73.7% of Americans identified as Christian in 2016. So that's making a specific claim about how many Americans identify as Christian. And that's something that could be tested against a body of empirical evidence. So it does count as definite.